The Bear Essentials podcast gives older bears a place to gather for real talk regarding topics and issues that they can relate to. Here at The Bear Essentials, we aren't just having conversations. We are looking to provide actionable intelligence through real-life experience and expertise of our guests. Our mission is to build a strong community that elevates and motivates people to go beyond their limiting beliefs by helping them realize that getting older is not an excuse to hibernate on their goals, but a reason to work harder.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. I'm your host, Charles Wallace. On today's episode, I speak with Gregg F. Martin. Gregg is a retired U.S. Army general. Now, in Gregg's career in the military, he experienced combat and he led large groups of people. During that time, Gregg showed tremendous courage. Today, Gregg comes on to the Bear Essentials and shows even more courage as we take a deep dive and talk about his battle with bipolar disorder. Unfortunately, today, there's a lot of stigma around mental illness. Gregg opens up about his own mental illness and how he's not ashamed of it or afraid to discuss it with others. And his mission is to make people aware and to allow other people to have courage to come out and speak about it, especially men who do not like to talk about it at all. So without further ado, let's jump in here to my interview with retired U.S. Army General Gregg F. Martin. Hi, Gregg. Thanks a lot for joining the show today. I am really excited to have you here. I'm really excited for my audience to hear about your journey. So how you doing?
I'm doing great, Charles. Thanks so much for having me. And I look forward to this. And thanks for doing what you're doing. I think it's a really important program and podcast that you have.
Yeah, thank you for that, Gregg. I personally, I didn't serve in the military. My grandfather, I have family who served in the military. My grandfather served in World War II. Always throughout my life, military people, it's been a big, really close to my heart. And I really I love having you guys on to try to, talk about your experiences and stories, because I think they're important. And I think it's the least I can do to try to pay you guys back for all that you do. So thank you again for your service.
Oh, you're welcome. It was really an honor to serve.
So Gregg, let's start there. Obviously, you Army. Could we talk a little bit about, going back a few years to your experience in the military? How did that come about?
So I went to the University of Maine at civilian school as a freshman, and I was a walk-on to Army ROTC because they had a great program called the Ranger Club where you got to do exciting outdoor adventurous things. So I was in Army ROTC, I liked it, and then I decided to apply to West Point. And I got in. So the next year I went to West Point, where I spent 4 years as a cadet, graduated in 1979 as a second lieutenant. My branch was Army Corps of Engineers. I spent most of my time in combat engineer units, which are, an integral part of what they call the combined arms team: infantry, armor, artillery, close air support, engineers. Went to Ranger School, Airborne School, all the HUA stuff, and then went to Germany for my first assignment. Spent 6 years in Germany as a platoon leader, company commander, and other leadership jobs. And it was fantastic. I mean, I fell in love with the soldiers, the mission, the muddy boots field army, which was so different than, the sort of the spit and polish of West Point. The real Army was all about leadership, and taking care of soldiers and being ready for war and combat readiness and all that. So I really fell in love with it, did well. And then the Army, one of the programs they have is they try to identify promising young officers and they send them to civilian grad school. So I got picked up for that program. Army sent me to MIT, where I got a couple degrees. And then from there, I was really hooked on the Army. And I just kept moving up, getting promoted, doing bigger jobs, all the way up till battalion level command, where I was commanding 500 combat engineers. Then I was a brigade commander, commanding thousands of engineers. And it was really in that brigade command job at the age of 43, the doctors think that intense stress and the thrill of combat, that it triggered my genetic predisposition for bipolar disorder. So it was already in my genetics, but that intense experience lit the match that set the bipolar off. That was in 2003. And it was a high performing mania that I entered into. And my performance was boosted and enhanced by the bipolar. I mean, I was smarter, more confident, more energy, more creative. I felt like Superman with my problem solving abilities and, felt pretty much fearless. And so that was actually a good positive result of bipolar disorder. And I was unknown, undiagnosed, undetected for the next 11 years. And I went from colonel to 1-star to 2-star general, bigger and bigger jobs. And during that period, my bipolar, the mania went higher and higher. The depression went lower and lower until finally in 2014, 11 years after onset, I went into full-blown mania, which is what they call it. I mean, I became over the top, disruptive, reckless, irresponsible in a major 2-star command. And my boss was compelled to remove me from command at the age of 58 and give me a command directive to go get a mental health exam. And then they actually misdiagnosed me 3 times and said I was fine, which I wasn't. I was severely mentally ill with bipolar. But a few months later, when I sank into depression, when I came down from the mania, it then became obvious that I had bipolar disorder, and I was diagnosed in 2014, 11 years after onset, with bipolar type 1.
Well, that's incredible. And I got to be honest with you, Greg, I never knew that. When I hear bipolar, right, I think of it as a disadvantage, right? Like, hearing you explain it like that, I never realized that it could act in a way like you described, that it could make you, better at things. That's pretty amazing. Going back a little bit, as you were progressing through your career in the Army, were there any signs early on that you were kind of like, something's not right? Or did you just never really know?
Well, I absolutely never knew. And the early pre-bipolar symptoms are masked. They were masked by my leadership, my personality, the success I was having. So there's a thing that they don't officially call it pre-bipolar, but that's what it is. It's called hyperthymia, having a hyperthymic personality, which I had in spades from my teenage years on. And what hyperthymia does, if you have it, it's a huge advantage. It gives you an overabundance of energy, enthusiasm, drive, creativity, all those positive attributes of leadership. And I had it, like I said, from high school on. But the problem with hyperthymia is, in my case, it inched upwards over the course of decades, and it got higher and higher and higher. And I soon, by the time I was in my 30s and 40s, I was really displaying early signs of pre-bipolar conditions. I was starting to act kind of crazy. I was starting to get kind of reckless. I was overly hoo-ah, which is a term the Army, hoo-ah, can do. But nobody knew what they were seeing. Nobody detected that there was anything wrong with this. No one tied it to potential for bipolar, least of all me. And it actually, again, it boosted and enhanced my performance for years and years. Until the problem with hyperthymia is it helps you until it stops helping you. And the way it typically stops helping you is it morphs into actual mania. And then it goes into more intense levels of mania and bipolar disorder, which is exactly what happened to me. I had never heard of hyperthymia until about a year ago. I read, and it's not taught in American psychiatry, it's not in the American psychiatric manuals, but it is taught in other countries around the world. And I read a phenomenal book, which I would recommend. It's called A First-Rate Madness: Uncovering the Links Between Leadership and Mental Illness, by a professor at Harvard and Tufts named Nasir Ghami. It's Ghaemi. And he basically does leadership case studies of famous leaders, and many of them had severe mental illness. And he describes how it actually helped most of them until such time that it went the other way, and then it started to hurt them. But this hyperthymia, for instance, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, John F. Kennedy, both had very, very strong hyperthymia that never morphed into bipolar disorder. So they were fortunate. Some famous people with really bad bipolar: Winston Churchill, Ted Turner, the businessman who established CNN, William Tecumseh Sherman, the great Civil War general. He didn't do a case study on President Teddy Roosevelt, but Teddy Roosevelt had bipolar disorder. I mean, it explains a lot of, how he behaved and who he was. So in my case, I just kept creeping upward towards bipolar. Then the onset was in 2003 in Iraq. But again, nobody noticed it. Nobody knew what they were looking at. They didn't understand the symptoms. And if they had, I could have possibly gotten an earlier intervention that might have really saved a lot of pain.
So when you talk about it obviously increased things, it made you better, do you look back now, or was there at any point, especially I'm assuming when you were in Iraq, probably, did you see combat when you were in Iraq?
Yes.
Do you look at that situation, knowing what you were going through, do you feel like, looking back, like, wow, this could have put not just myself, but my men, my team in danger? Was there any risk of that happening by not knowing what was going on?
Yes, there was a risk, and I was fortunate. I was fortunate that my mania in the year I was in Iraq was, again, of a high performing nature that boosted my performance and enhanced my my leadership. If it had been much higher, if it had gone much higher, it could have presented a danger in terms of recklessness, taking unnecessary risks, making grandiose decisions that weren't based in reality. So it could have gone badly. It's interesting. I have gone back as part of my research and telling my story, and I've interviewed dozens and dozens of people who worked around me, both subordinates, peers, superiors, over my entire Army career. And I've asked them, I told them, I said, hey, I've been diagnosed with bipolar disorder. Here's what my story is. Here's what happened. When we were together in whatever year or whatever unit, did you see any unusual behaviors? And I gave them what the symptoms of bipolar are, both mania and depression. And over a period of time, like in my early years, everything was positive. Hey, you were a great leader, loved working for you, you were an inspiration, you were extremely energetic and enthusiastic and driven, but we liked it because we got good things done. That was like when I was a lieutenant and a captain. But as time went on and I went to higher jobs and my hyperthymia got higher and was creeping towards bipolar, and then I actually went into mania, then people started saying, oh, wow, you had bipolar. Yeah, I did notice things. I did notice these symptoms of mania. I did think you were, and a couple of the things, to go right to your question. I mean, I had people who worked closely with me in Iraq, and they said, now that you mention it, you took excessive risks in Iraq. You always wanted to go outside the wire to where the action was. You weren't content unless you could get out there and really get close and see and feel, the real combat that was going on. And we think that in retrospect, you were overly aggressive. you are an overly big risk taker. And in the way I would make decisions and rapidly commit scarce engineer resources into the fight. A lot of my people around me thought that I should have gone slower, had a more deliberate planning and decision-making process, and really just been a little more cautious, a little more deliberate in my decisions. But I would get, I would hear about, a mission that would tell me, okay, this unit, 101st Airborne Division, needs a bridge up by Mosul. Boom! I would just say, go, figure it out, get ready to go. I want people moving out by tomorrow morning. Go. And people underneath would say, we really need to do more of a threat assessment. We really need to analyze the condition of the roads. What's the condition of where the enemy? What about IEDs? What about ambushes? And I would just say, go, let's go. We'll figure it out on the fly. The 101st Airborne needs a bridge. So we got to go there and do it. And I did that. That was my modus operandi. I mean, aggressive, decisive, fast. And it accomplished great things in combat on the battlefield. And it was, highly recognized as being effective, and that the engineers were a major impact player on the battlefield. But unfortunately, we did not have any catastrophic losses due to my kind of hasty decision making.
So, Gregg, when I hear about what was going on with you, do you think that this is more prevalent than people realize within the armed forces, especially I start to think a lot more about, special forces, like those really, really high level performers. A lot of what you described, I feel like I've spoken to some of them on the show and never really put it together until hearing this. Do you think it's something now that the Army, the military in general, is looking deeper into because of a case like yours?
I don't really know if they're looking deeper into it. I know that the armed forces are very interested and concerned about mental health, mental well-being, suicide prevention, and so forth. So they are really interested in that. Some elements of the armed forces, the Navy in particular, are very interested in my story. The Navy has, really reached out to me and asked me to talk and speak, and they've published articles and so forth, much more than the other services. I don't know what they're doing to really zero on bipolar disorder. My belief, and I'll tell you why, is that there's much more bipolar disorder in the armed forces than they realize or acknowledge, and I'll tell you why. First of all, somewhere between 20 to 25% of the global and American population have some kind of mental health condition, a disorder, an illness, what have you. It could be bipolar, it could be depression, could be PTSD, traumatic brain injury, anxiety, you name it. So that's a huge percent. And there is every reason to believe that those percentages apply to the armed forces as well. So we have 2 million people, when you count active guard and reserve, 2 million people in the U.S. Armed Forces. So let's say it's a quarter. That's 500,000 people who have some form of mental health condition. That is huge. And they're not even close to having that recorded and people, realizing they have it and getting treatment and all that. And I don't know what the number that is currently on the books, but I guarantee it's not 500,000 of our troops. If you look at bipolar disorder, depending on whose statistics you read, it's typically between 2 and 4% of the American and global population. So what would even 2% of 2 million people be? How many is that? Is that 40,000?
Yeah,
potential bipolar, maybe 40 to 80,000.
Yeah.
But I am of the belief it's probably more, and I'll tell you why. The typical age for onset of bipolar disorder is between 18 and 25. Well, those are the exact years that most of the people come in, the cohorts come into the armed forces. So they're right at the exact correct age population for onset of bipolar. Second, many to most people who have bipolar disorder have a personality type that is high energy, enthusiasm, drive, all those things. So that's who comes into the armed forces to begin with. So now you're at an even higher level. The third factor is how does the onset occur? Typically, the onset of bipolar is because of a high stress event. Well, the minute a service member walks in the door of the armed forces, he or she enters high stress. First time they meet the drill sergeant, high stress. And then their entire experience as, a member of the armed forces is all about training for war, deploying for war, fighting wars. It is a very high stress profession and environment, just like being a firefighter or a police officer. And so I have every reason to believe that people in the armed forces, the type of people they are, the age they come in at, and then the stress environment is going to push more, not less, numbers of people into bipolarity. And so I think there's probably quite a bit, but I have been unable to get any numbers or figures because they keep it, under close hold, and there's privacy rules and things like that.
So when you mentioned the Navy being extremely interested, I'll be honest, that doesn't surprise me when I think about, like SEALs, things like that. And the high performer, they're typically very high performers, right? Is trying to word this the right way. Do you think when you mentioned that pre-bipolar, right? And all those people you talked about, like, Teddy Roosevelt, Kennedy, things like that. Is there, do you think, potentially a path where that can almost be used to an advantage if it's detected early enough and it's brought under control? So like in your case, all the good things you were responsible for, they catch it sooner. Would it be they almost get all the good things, but they don't allow what I'll refer to as almost a crash, right? Where you go into mania.
That's a $100 question. I would say yes, it can be done. And there are psychiatrists and scientists who believe that can be done and that you could start prescribing medications early to kind of control it and keep it from getting out of control. Dr. Gamey, the guy I mentioned with the book, he believes it can be done, but in order to be authorized to do it in the psychiatric community, they have to do extensive tests, medical, scientific tests to show that this is an effective and a good means of medicine. And I don't think people have done that scientific medical work to sort of confirm and prove that it can be done. Kind of the irony of it is, like, I ended up having a great career, went all the way to 2 stars, probably had some level of bipolar, before the official onset decision, in 2003. But if it had been detected and diagnosed, then I would have been diagnosed with bipolar disorder. I undoubtedly would have faced a medical evaluation board, and I probably would have been medically discharged from the Army because the Army doesn't want people with bipolar disorder serving because of the danger that it can go, really full-blown mania. And you essentially, like I did, I went into a state of madness. I went crazy. And so the military doesn't really want people with that condition to be around weapons and ammo and, top secret material. And I can't blame them, which then goes back to the question, like the Army got a lot of really good years out of me while I had bipolar, pretty much raging at a pretty serious level. And it made me better for the most part. But if they had known about it, I probably would have been, medically discharged. And so it's kind of a conundrum.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. So curious now, you go into the mania, you get diagnosed, all that happens. Eventually you're out of the military. Being out of the military, when you finally get out, does going from such that, like you said, that high stress, high pace environment, is that in a way almost its own type of stress that kind of influence you also? Or did you notice once you're out, you're kind of, I'm assuming medication, whatnot, do you notice that you start to come down from it?
Um, so after I was in full blown mania and got removed from my command in summer of 2014, I spiraled from mania down into severe depression. And then my brain got messed up with psychosis, with delusions and hallucinations. And so in my last 5 or 6 months in the military, I was treated by the military medical system, and they really didn't do a very good job. They kind of fell victim to this thing called VIP medicine, very important person. And they treated me different because I was a general. They were a little bit intimidated. They didn't want to hurt me. I mean, they did it for the right reasons, but they treated me with kid gloves, and they weren't aggressive in dealing with severe bipolar the way they would have been with a sergeant or a younger, junior person. And so by the time I got out in May of 2015, I was an absolute mess. I mean, horribly depressed, terrifying psychoses of my own brutal death. The medications weren't working at all. The military did not do a continuity of care plan to hand me off to someone in the civilian world. So I just walked out of the military off a cliff. And to go to your question, yes, I think that the leaving and the disengagement from the high stress, exciting, rewarding military life to be away from that had its own depressive spiral that was hand in hand with the natural depressive spiral of the bipolar disease. So it was a combination of two things that brought me down. And then I was in terrible shape. I did see a civilian psychiatrist who gave me medication. It didn't work. I didn't really have much respect for the doctor or the therapist in the civilian world. We didn't hit it off. I was in horrible shape. And then finally, a comrade, a friend of mine from the Army, a retired guy, he just wouldn't give up on me. He kept pursuing me to get me help. And he did some research. I was living up in northern New England, and he found a really good VA, Veterans Administration Hospital, in White River Junction, Vermont. And they had a renowned psychiatry department. So he helped get me in there. And I went in, and they immediately hospitalized me. And that was the best thing that could have happened, because it really set me on the path to recovery.
Hang tight, everyone. We'll be right back after a word from NGBN TV.
Hey, Charles, I just wanted to welcome you and all the Bear Essential listeners and watchers to NGBN.TV. My name is Chris Rubio, and I'm the host of The Rubio Method. We are a show about men's mental health that comes out every other Wednesday. Our latest episode just came out today, June 22nd. Then we'll have one in another 2 weeks. We already have 9 episodes out with myself and my co-host, Nick Monahan. We navigate the zone of men turning into middle age and going through health crises, whether it's mental, physical, and we have a good time while doing it. We tell a lot of funny stories. We have great interviews and guests, and it's just an all-around good time for about a half an hour to 45 minutes. So make sure you check out the Rubio Method as well on NGBN.TV, YouTube, Spotify, Google, and Amazon podcasts. And once again, from the Rubio Method to the Bear Essentials, welcome to NGBN.TV.
I'm very glad for you. I'm glad that you were fortunate enough to be able to recover and not have anything really bad happen while you were still in the military. So how was it as far as your family, friends dealing with you? Because from people I speak to and from what I understand, right, that almost becomes, especially for a guy like you, right, being in the military, was it difficult for your family to help you, to deal with you, or would you even allow them, right? Were you just kind of like standoffish with them?
My family was great. My wife is really a saint. So she was like rock steady, rock solid, did everything she could to support me. We had a son who was living at home with us in Washington, D.C., and he was very helpful. And he has bipolar disorder himself. So that was, kind of a good combination. Our other two sons were living, they were both in the Army, living overseas, but they were good. They didn't turn their back on me. So I'd say family was a real plus. Um, Employees that I had worked for, colleagues, some were really, really good, very supportive. They reached out to me and said, "Hey, sorry to hear about it. Sorry to hear you have bipolar. Sorry you got removed from your job. Is there anything I can do to help you?" So I had people like that, but a lot of the people that were my employees and colleagues, they kind of turned their back on me and kind of shunned me. People don't understand mental illness. They don't understand bipolar disorder. They don't know what it's all about. It's kind of spooky and it scares them. Bipolar scares people, and so a lot of them really shunned me, turned their back, and to this day won't return emails or phone calls. And so, I mean, that really says who they are in terms of their character. But then I had other friends, like the guy I told you about. They just really stuck with me. I mean, they would call me on the phone, text, email, visit, and they really helped me through this really tough time of depression. And one of the things that when you're in depression, you withdraw. You don't want to see anybody. You become antisocial. So I was an extroverted social guy who then became withdrawn, didn't want to see people, didn't want to talk to people, didn't want to talk about mental health or anything like that. But some people were just really good. I mean, they would come over, they would visit. And so a lot of them were really, really good. You kind of really find out who your friends are. And that was really helpful, those friends. So that was kind of the deal. And then since I've been in my recovery, I can talk about it in a little bit, the recovery aspect, what I've learned and how I've gone about recovering. The role of friends and that kind of thing is super important, which I can elaborate on.
Yeah, well, I'm glad to hear that. Obviously, your family, I would expect, it's great to hear your family, especially your wife. Shout out to her. That's fantastic to hear your wife, your sons. And I agree with what you said. Just, I don't even want to give it credence, the negative of the people who may have turned their back. I mean, that's more about them than it's anything about you. But hearing about some of your really true friends who stuck by you and helped you through this, I mean, that actually makes me feel good for you and for them. It shows a lot about their character. So, Gregg, knowing that you were, military, Army, a general, being leader of men and women in very stressful situations, being a truly embodiment of alpha male, is it difficult for you to speak about mental illness, about having bipolar disorder?
No, not at all. In fact, my mission in life, my purpose in life is to share my bipolar story to help stop the stigma and save lives. So, I mean, this is what I do. I speak, I write, I confer with people to tell the story, get more people talking about it, developing solutions, and and that sort of thing. Look, it happened. I mean, I was doing great in the Army, had a great career, did all kinds of things. Got to lead soldiers in combat, did interesting, challenging jobs at the strategic level, and I came down with bipolar. It just happened, in my brain. Kind of the same way you come down with cancer or diabetes or heart disease. So it happened. It basically derailed my life, but I was able to fight through bipolar hell for a couple of years and then start a recovery journey 6 years ago. So I'm really thankful that I've been able to do that and sort of take this quote unquote gift of bipolar disorder and turn it into a positive force that can really help other people. And, knowing a lot about bipolar now and how bad and tough it can be on people. I mean, it destroys marriages, families, careers, finances. It leads to homelessness, alcohol and drug addiction, prison, violence, death by suicide. I consider myself as severe as my bipolar was, and it could come back, that, I've been able to kind of fight through all this stuff. And I'm really kind of proud that, I'm a bipolar survivor, a thriver, and a warrior helping others.
Yeah, Greg, I that's what I kind of wanted to end on. When I look to, a guy like you, your military career, obviously I consider you a hero, for what you accomplished throughout your military career. But honestly, I think what you're doing now it makes you just as much of a hero, because men do not like to speak about this stuff. And when they see a man like you who, in the positions you were in, that you can come out and speak about it, it makes it easier for them. So, Greg, where could people find more information about you or follow you as far as what you have maybe going on?
The best place is my website, which is www.generalgregg, with two G's on the end, Martin.com. So general and then GreggMartin.com. It'll take you to the website. I've got most of my articles, many of my talks. It's got, can link them to me on email. And I would welcome any dialogue with any of your listeners.
I will be sure to add those links in the notes so they'll be able to find you relatively easy. Okay. We'll do that. And listen, I can't thank you enough for having the courage to come on here and share your story. I think it's going to help a lot of people. It's been an honor for me. And like I said, thank you for your service. I can only salute you, sir. And I appreciate this now and for everything you've done in your past. So thank you.
Hey, thank you, Charles. It was really an honor and a privilege, and I appreciate you and all your listeners, and I hope that this helps make a difference in stopping the stigma and saving lives.
Well, thank you, Greg, and thanks everyone for listening. I really appreciate it. Take care. Bye.
This has been the Bear Essentials. Thanks for listening, and remember, never hibernate on your goals.